Okay, our next speaker is no stranger to many in this audience. Dr. Dawn Berry is an institution at DPAA. She's worked as a researcher and a historian for more than 10 years, and I think she's spoken in front of this group probably most of those 10 years. She's a staunch advocate for the families and a dedicated researcher. Today, she serves as the chief of the research for the Korean War and Cold War in the Indo-Pacific Directorate. So I would like to introduce Dawn Berry.
See if I'm on. Can you guys hear me okay? No, okay. Maybe we'll move the microphone up and you guys can tell me, is that better? And even better? And even better. I don't know if it's possible to follow Mr. Chun. I really don't. The director mentioned this. I was fortunate enough to be at the Korean War Veterans Association meeting last October, and I spoke to the group, and then the next day Arnold Chun was there, and I was completely blown away by his story, by his message, and all of the work that he's doing to remember a war that has impacted you so profoundly. He is a kind and empathetic person, and I'm so grateful that you got to have the experience that I did last October. I'm also notorious for wandering around this room, and this is the first time that I've ever had a lavalier. So if I start sounding strange, please make some sort of wild signals. I will try to be quieter, and we'll see if that works okay. I also have a lot of notes in this book. I don't want to forget anything, so usually I like speaking completely. Now I have a clicker. This is the dangerous part. So most of you know that I'm a historian by training, a bit of a Luddite. This is pretty good because there's a big green button that says go ahead and a red one that might mean backwards, but I can't promise that the slides are going to go in the right direction. So our agency video starts with a question. Why keep searching? Because no missing American service member should be left behind. For all of you in this room, you have lived with this search for your lifetimes, and even if you're new to this mission and this is your first meeting, your families have lived with this for more than 70 years. For the employees and staff of the Defense POW MIA Accounting Agency, this is not a job. This is an honor, this is a vocation, and this has become all of our missions to continue the work that people have done generations before us. What I'm going to be talking about today is not my story, but it's building on the work of all of the people who have come before me. The researchers who have worked for decades to try to get you answers and also incorporated the information that you've given to us. I'm also going to try not to be emotional, but given that I was just crying and I'm on the verge of tears right now, please forgive me when I undoubtedly will start crying in a couple minutes. So when I came to this agency, a colleague told me, she kind of looked me in the eye, I moved from England, never having been to Hawaii, never having really been in the Pacific aside from working in China. And she sat me down on my first day and she said, people who come here either come for a year, 5 years, or for life. So I already had an introduction. I've now been here for over 10 years, so I guess I'm a lifer. And it's my absolute honor to be able to tell you a little bit about something that the director mentioned yesterday. So the director talked a little bit about Roland Lee Bowser. I've sat down with a lot of families over the years, including many people in this room, and Roland Bowser was captured at Unsan in November of 1950. He later became a POW at Camp 5. But Roland Bowser was more than his circumstances of loss. Roland Bowser was a son, Roland Bowser was a brother, and Roland Bowser was an uncle. And Roland Bowser's family, very large family, never gave up hope that his remains would be returned home. And neither did we. So the story that I want to tell you a little bit about is the research part that went into helping to identify Roland Bowser. Oh, that just got a little bit loud. So some of you might not know this. Every time I sit down with you, I take notes. I've talked about before that I have pictures that many of you have given me up in my office. Even if you don't know me, if I've worked on your loved one and I have a picture of them, they're in my office, and I met some people who that was the case of last year. I also keep every case summary that I do with every family, and I write notes. So I met the Bowser family quite some time ago and several times, but this is one from Birmingham, Alabama, where I said, Sister Marjorie, brother-in-law Robert, brother Paul, sister-in-law Joyce, niece and niece, Deborah and Nancy, very nice family, need to work harder. To me. Note to self, do more. So for those of you who don't know, Camp 5 was the largest permanent camp on the Yalu River, so the largest and first POW camp in North Korea. There are a number of Camp 5 families here, and I've met with most of you. It was a very, very challenging place to be. It was established in 1951 in January, and between the early months of 1951, 50% of the people who entered the camp never left, including Roland Bowser. When we started researching Roland Bowser and other casualties from Camp 5, we were very, very fortunate to have quite a bit of information. So this is where historians get excited. You can see that I have paper, and for many of you who have seen me running around the hallways, I usually have a giant suitcase. I am not leaving or moving. That is usually paper that I'm bringing to CSRs. So sorry, and you're welcome for all of the random documents that I've given you over the years. So what we see here, I don't know if I have a little, I better not put my arm up. We'll stay to the center. What we see here on the far left side is the official and unofficial POW list from the Korean War, and what's outlined in red is Roland Bowser. We have all kinds of information about POWs, and there's some cases we don't have very much information, but for Camp 5 we have more. We have unit records, we have reports from the Chinese, we have these American records, and then we also have witness testimonies that Phil talked a little bit about yesterday. So witness testimonies from after the war, and then the work that Phil O'Brien has done as well. This map, for those Camp 5 families who have seen this, is something that probably all of you have seen before. There's several indications of where different cemeteries were, and also there's a notation that says where remains may have washed away. Now this is where I have to calm down a little bit, because for those of you who've heard me talk about before, this is another little bit of information. So after the war, we have never been able to go back to Camp 5, even though we've asked in the past, for a bunch of different reasons. But after the war, we received 4,219 sets of remains from the North Koreans, and about 2,900 of those were believed to be Americans. 416 of those were unable to be identified after the war, including X14343, who happened to have come back as Roland Bowser. And he wasn't able to be identified at the time, so some people sometimes ask, How accurate were those IDs at Kakura? I'll leave some of it to the anthropologists, but from a historical perspective and history of science perspective, I can say quite a lot of work went into identifications, and the anthropologists at CIU Kakura, Japan, were incredibly conservative. So if there was a possibility that that individual was not the person that it could have been because he was 18 to 24, had virgin dentition, so teeth without a lot of work, hadn't had any major injuries, it's entirely possible that they didn't identify him. Or if something didn't match, they had records for teeth that didn't necessarily match what we thought what the teeth in the remains were, they would have said unable to identify. And that was the case of 14343. The historian in me really wants to ask if anyone has questions, but I know that's an end of the day thing. So I want to give a shout out to a number of people. So since around the year 2000, a number of people, and even prior to that, people had been working on Camp 5 remains. We had someone named Ron Broward, who was a Marine. He was injured at Horseshoe Hill and lost several of his close friends, some of whom had never been recovered. And he was one of the people who started work on the Korean War unknowns and led to some of the earliest disinterments from the National Memorial Cemetery of the Pacific. And just because we said we talk about paper a lot, this is my copy of some of the work that Ron Brower did from the Kakura binder. And if you can see, it is completely insane. I went through every single line. I won't do that again. Keep it away from the microphone. Every single line of what he did so I could understand everything that had happened before me. We also heard from Phil O'Brien. So Phil O'Brien at the time, so Ron Broward volunteered for JPAC and had a tremendous impact in Punch Bowl Unknowns. He is a major driving force about why we had any Punch Bowl Unknowns. Should stick with the microphone. Phil O'Brien, who we talked about yesterday, did something we lovingly refer to as Phil's folios, which are his beautiful notes about essentially every POW from the Korean War, written in a cryptic script that one needs probably a couple of PhDs to be able to decode. But here's one of my copies of about 20 volumes of Phil's folios. When I searched my computer, there were 363 documents on my computer alone relating to Ron Broward. 13 different historians had worked on this case, including Dr. Mike Dolsky, who wrote a disinterment memo in 2013 to disinter and hopefully identify X14343. However, at the time we had been doing disinterments for a little over a decade, and beyond the challenges of having embalming powder and large numbers of missing service members from Camp 5 in particular, because it was the biggest camp with very, very high casualty rates, there was something else going on with Camp 5. When we did the disinterments, it was very, very, very hard to make identifications. At the time that I came to start working on Camp 5, we had completely paused all disinterments on Camp 5. I was lucky enough to work with two forensic anthropologists to start digging into why Camp 5 remains couldn't be identified. At the time, Punch Bowl Unknowns in general were treated as single sets of remains. So when they were disinterred, we thought in general that most of those remains were one individual. And in most cases, not counting Camp 5, they were. So I looked at it from a historical perspective. Usually when we as historians approach this type of research, you hear about military historians doing order of battle and unit history, and you guys have seen that in a lot of your case summaries. We tried to think about what's a different way that we can think about Camp 5. So what we did was work backwards from the information that we had. So where the remains were processed and how they were processed, how we got them back. So all of the remains we have from North Korea, with the exception of our JRO recoveries, which didn't include Camp 5, we did not recover ourselves. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. The other piece there is that there's interesting things that happened environmentally with Camp 5. So thinking about where people were buried, and I actually had a very, one might say, animated conversation with a Camp 5 family in the hall. Oh, 5 minutes. All right. We are going to speed it up to super speed. What I will say is what we discovered, oh no, there we go. We knew it was going to happen this year. What we discovered, this is the Kakura binder on the left side. The names are all alphabetical, which we've talked about if you've been to a family member update. You can see Bowser's name. And then again, on the right-hand side, you can see Bowser written over in pencil. And what we found when we thought that they were individual sets of remains, the historical evidence showed that there was potential commingling. So prior to working on Korea, I worked on Cabanatuan and POW camps with mass graves. And there was evidence in the historical records that there were also group burials at Camp 5. And what that meant, that there was potentially commingling. At the same time, the forensic anthropologist that I worked with had the very first time multiple FRS sequences to come back from a single set of remains. So there's one set of remains, came back with 3 sequences from Camp 5. That meant that that one set of remains was actually 3 individuals. So that was the historical and the scientific evidence coming together to let us think about this in a new way. When we talk about the Korean War disinterment plan, when we talk about the 652, there's lots of reasons why we can do this. But part of it is the work between historians and researchers and forensic anthropologists that gave us the evidence to make an argument to the DoD to apply for and get approval for the disinterment of 652 sets of remains, including those from Camp 5. And what you see in red up on the board is X14343, which we talked about earlier. I'm just going to whip through this, but what I want to tell you is all of the work we did was built on decades of work from previous researchers and analysts, like Phil O'Brien, who you heard from yesterday, like our veteran Ron Broward, like Mike Dolsky, etc., and Dan Boffman, for those of you who know him. What we're doing right now for North Korea, we're reevaluating everything we did for the JROs. We're looking back at historical research, and we're also seeing where the identifications are coming from North Korea. So when, hopefully, we get to go back to North Korea, we are as ready as possible to be able to do operations. That's our North Korea story. DMZ, you might have heard from the director that we might be getting back in, or we won't be going back in, but Macri might be going back into the DMZ relatively quickly. We have a large-scale research project to increase our DMZ efforts, which we're very excited about. For South Korea, and I know there's several families where this applies, we are leaving no stone left unturned. What that means is we're going back over every mission we've done, every lead we have, every case in South Korea to see if there's anything else we can do for you. And we're also maximizing all opportunities. This year we had a couple of extra days because we had a site closure, and we also had a few too many people on a mission. So what we ended up doing was make an extra IT light that helped us investigate 2 additional sites. If we have extra time, our team is not wandering around Korea, they are having extra time in the archives. Every second that we can work for you, we are doing it. We're building capability and capacity in underwater activities, and in China, we have had an archival exchange in Beijing, which helped us with our Cold War cases. Also, we wrote an MOU and drafted it while we were in China, which was signed later that year, that allowed us to do activities relating to the Korean War, which is happening right now. For Cold War families, we are also asking for access to museums to have any information about your cases. And we're pushing as hard as we can to get answers for you as much as possible. So yesterday, X14343. Well, I'll say this quickly because I see Jennifer on the side. That'll be very fast in my last sentence. I've told you guys before that when I did my citizenship interview, I said the greatest thing that I can do with my life is to help give someone their name back. And an unknown in the punch bowl that started as X14343 with 25 years of research is now Roland Bowser, who was buried at the Arlington National Cemetery yesterday. I hope that next year we have even more answers for you. This year, our team wrote more than 50 historical reports, and you're going to hear more about that from Jenny Jin. I'm so honored and grateful to be a part of this mission, and I just want to thank you so much for letting me speak today. We appreciate you.
Told you Don was an institution in DPAA. So for 10 years, two of DPAA's predecessor organizations had access to North Korea to conduct operations. Unfortunately, as you all have heard from different people these last 2 days, that access ended in 2005. And although there have been many attempts to re-engage with the North Koreans, we have not had any communications with them since March of 2019. Today we have 3 alumni from SIL-High and JPAC, Dr. Brad Adams, a forensic anthropologist, Mr. Chris Tarrant, who served as the team leader, and Mr. Tom Woods, who served as a team sergeant. These 3 gentlemen each participated in multiple missions into North Korea. They're going to share their experiences with you today. And our panel will be facilitated by Dr. Franklin Damon, Laboratory Director of our Offutt Laboratory in Nebraska, who also participated on multiple joint recovery operations. So, Franklin and fellas, come on up.
Good morning. Good morning. Can you guys hear me okay? Is this coming through? Mic check. We good? All right. No, not good. A little closer to my mouth. I'll try not to swallow it. Well, good morning, everybody, and thank you, Jennifer, for the introduction. My name is Franklin Damon. I'm here, as you mentioned, with 3 alumni of the agency. But before we get into it, I'll just give a quick overview of some of the context. As I understand, about 30 to 40% of you are new here this year. And as Jennifer said, operations, joint recovery operations, ended in 2005. But they began, there was a 9-year period starting in 1996. Shortly after the turnover of the Korean 208, or known as the K-208, a unilateral turnover of 208 boxes of remains, we quickly ensued with some U.S. negotiations with North Koreans to gain access to create recovery investigation operations in North Korea. The 9 years of effort today has produced just under 200, and it's 196 individual identifications from the remains that were recovered during these JRO, or Joint Recovery Operations. And to kick things off, I'd actually just like to ask the panel members here to introduce themselves, tell you about when they were with our predecessor agencies, when were they in Korea, and what role did they perform on the teams. Brad, let's start with you.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Chris Tarrant, again, honored and humbled to have been invited to come share my experiences with you all, so thank you for having me. My name is Chris Tarrant, and I was assigned to SIL High and JPAC during the transition time from 2002 to 2005. I went back to JPAC in 2012 and was a investigative team leader in the research and analysis section for a couple more years after that. My role in the North Korean JROs was a team leader, and I did 2 missions in North Korea, specifically up in the Chosin Reservoir area.
Thank you, guys. First question is going to Chris. As a team leader, you have to do a lot of administrative, organizational kinds of tasks in order to prepare the team to go out into the field. What thoughts were going through your mind when you were told that you were going to be leading a team of Americans into North Korea?
Thanks, Franklin. Previously I had done a couple of recovery and investigative missions in South Korea. Part of the prep was getting ready and getting indoctrinated into kind of what was going on back in the 50s during the conflict. I was excited. North Korea is an isolationist country and does not have a lot of access, and there's not a lot of opportunities for Americans to go. And particularly, just the mission in general of JPAC to recover, U.S. servicemen who were unaccounted for. Again, I was just happy and excited and ready to get out there and get after it.
And as a team leader, you're 03, right? Air Force captain, is that right?
Yep, I was an Air Force captain, and the role of the team leader, like Franklin alluded to, is to coordinate all the logistics and the safety of the team inbound and outbound of the countries that we go into. And once we're on site, then leadership kind of shifts to the forensic anthropologist to lead the scientific aspect and the recovery, the actual recovery mission.
Brad or Woody, you got any anecdotes on kind of preparation and thinking about going into North Korea? I think both of you were already married at that time. Nervous? Family conversations going on?
I mean, for me as an anthropologist, the idea of going to North Korea was sort of exciting, just to see something that nobody from the U.S. really has the opportunity to see, and to see the weirdness of it and see it firsthand and to go there. So I volunteered early on to go. Like, I'd only been out there for a year. I was hired in '97 and was out, volunteered to go to North Korea in '98, because it was like, who else is going to get the opportunity to see that firsthand and participate? So, as an anthropologist and interested in different cultures and things, I was like,
One of the things that I would typically do, not just for North Korea, but for all the other areas that I did recoveries in, was to try and get historical accounts, like, just regular books of what the actual situations were for the areas that we were going to do recoveries in. So two of the books that I remember distinctly that I read prior to going into North Korea was How to Negotiate with North Korea. And the answer is, yeah, there's typically no negotiation with North Korea. And then the other one was Breakout, which was essentially the Chosin Reservoir conflict and battle up there, and what happened, and as I'm sure you all are very, very familiar with, but just the overall history, the movements of the soldiers, in to help aid in where we may be able to look and find. And the last thing that was extremely helpful was I was still there with other people who had, I was there with Brad, who had been to North Korea prior to that. So just picking their brain on what their experiences were, and what to pack, how was it over there, how were you treated, and trying to get that anecdotal experience prior to going in there.
Yeah, so jumping ahead a little bit, late 90s, early 2000s, it's not exactly a tourist destination for a lot of Americans. There's no direct United flight, from Honolulu into Pyongyang. Chris, organizing these movements, tell us a little bit about how that would work out.
Yeah, so the first thing that we had to do was coordinate. So we would go in through China. We flew in and spent a couple days in Beijing, and then flew on the one-star rated state-sponsored Air Koryo owned by North Korea from Beijing into Pyongyang. And so part of the logistics of that was obtaining the visas for China, and then coordinating how we're going to get visas for North Korea. So I'm sure Brad and Woody can give a little more detail, but we would send all of our passports to California for the Chinese embassy to stamp for entry into China. And then when we were in China, we were coordinating with the North Korean embassy to get the actual North Korean visas to fly into to Pyongyang. And then, so typically when you travel internationally, you get a stamp, right? So there's no stamps in North Korea because they don't want any record of you being in there. So their visa is a little piece of paper that they slide into your visa, and when you exit the country, they take it out. So it's like you were never there. And so it's, they had everything nailed down, extremely detail-oriented with, how they were covering their tracks and shielding the rest of the North Korean population from all these Americans that are coming into the country. So everything, again, very scripted. I don't want to jump down, but the way we took to get to the Chosin Reservoir was about 3 days, and we're going straight west, and we're going straight north, and then or straight east rather, and then straight north, and then straight west over to the Chosin, the most indirect route you could possibly take. And part of that was to shield us from some of their military installations, so we could not gather intelligence. And the other part was they didn't want the population at large seeing that they were traveling with Americans. And I know we're going to talk about that in just a second, so I won't spoil it. But that's a little taste of how it was kind of getting into the country.
What do you tell about the airplane, Air Koryo?
Yeah, you said you were excited about going in. Still excited on that flight in?
Yeah. Let Woody tell a little bit about the Air Koryo airline.
So, coming into North Korea, as Chris alluded to, is this airplane was it's nothing like we would ever imagine right now that we fly on. I think it had velvet covering inside. It was late 40s, 50s, and deck decor. And so you would fly into North Korea, the plane lands, and you see North Korean officials that are running everything. They run out with this vehicle and they're spraying the brakes down with a water hose to try to stop the fires. And this is no joke. So I experienced this 3 times coming into that country, and so you land and they're doing that, and they scare you off. stay for a few days before we get ready to move to our locations that we were doing recovery operations in.
You know, a lot of the times when we go into a country, one of the first things we do is exchange money. Was there any kind of how did the currency work? You know, did they?
We had, they would prefer American dollars, so that was a lot of times that would be the preferred form of payment. But we also, if we went to, a lot of times we were out like at a base camp secluded, but on the weekends and in and out of the country we'd stay at hotels. And I always liked to just collect stuff, so I would buy like North Korean stamps and propaganda books and anything I could get just because it was so weird. And that I would have to sometimes use like North Korean dollars, but they had different money for tourists, and it was like this little tiny like Monopoly bills that we would have to use, and it had some ridiculous exchange rate, like 2 for 1 or something. But then the North Koreans themselves had different types of money, but there was kind of like this tourist money that we had to use, and I brought some of it back, like these tiny little bills. And then I think Chris, you have a story.
There was also no proper change given. So you had to have small bills because the change that they gave you was, no kidding, candy. When you bought something like a drink or a Coke at the little concession stand, you gave them a couple bucks and they reach in and hit this jar of candy and just throw it on the table, and that is your change, sir. Thank you for your business. Thank you for your American money, and here is your change.
Did you ever figure out the exchange rate between $1 and a chiclet?
Well, it's not 4 chiclets to $1. I'll tell you that.
Well, while you guys were in Pyongyang hanging out before going out to the site, did they take you anywhere? Did they let you do any sightseeing, PT, let you just have free reign of where you wanted to go? How did that work out?
I was always like, hey, can you take us to a museum? Can you take us to different places? And we were not allowed to go any place on our own. We were with the Army, the KPA, Korean People's Army, and so we were not allowed to wander around or do anything. Sometimes they would take us to see things, I guess sweet talk them into maybe going somewhere. But there was absolutely zero freedom for us to wander.
What is, you mentioned this propaganda now a couple of times. Explain what that might look like. What did you see?
I mean, basically, it's like a like a dystopian country with like communist architecture, and there are billboards around that you'll see, but there's only 2 things on the billboards about like the leaders, like a lot of dear leaders and great propaganda about the North Korean leadership, and the other is killing Americans. It was literally like that's all the people see is the worship of the leaders and the desire to kill Americans.
I remember distinctly, and these billboards are huge. Big North Korean boot on U.S. soldiers, a representation of U.S. soldiers' neck, skeleton on their neck. So they were not fans. And so that was, like Brad said, it was displayed all throughout the trip. And, in retrospect, I wonder if they took us on the routes with the most billboards to try and intimidate us. But, the propaganda machine is big over there.
Yeah, and I mean, I jotted it down, but which is all over like some of these propaganda books that I got, and billboards. It was, put on these spectacles here. It's not subtle. Like the Korean People's Army's motto is wipe out all U.S. imperialist aggressors, sworn enemy of the Korean people. So again, not too subtle about how they feel about Americans and how, I'm sure it was strange for them to have us there too, and for a lot of these like young teenage North Korean Army guys to be working side by side with people that they have been taught since they were babies to want to kill. So that was, a little bit of a delicate situation there as well.
So when we went into Pyongyang, we stayed, I think it was 2 nights in one of their hotels. And we were, prior to that, our in brief from the intel community was, hey, assume everything is bugged. There's 2-way mirrors in the rooms. Just assume that you are always being monitored when you're in the hotel. And so the hotel that we stayed in was on a river, and it's where they kept the U.S. Pueblo from when that was captured. I think it was in the 60s. But anyway, that is a prized possession, and they have that on full display. I was told that a couple of the teams prior to us going in were able to visit that, and then they abruptly stopped that. And one of the common themes where, Brad mentioned, hey, he would always ask to go out. One of the things that the responses that we always received from the Korean counterparts, or North Korean counterparts, was it's not in the contract. So we had an agreement to go in and do recoveries. From our perspective, we would have liked to see more detail in there about what we can and can't do. From their perspective, it was extremely vague, which gave them a little bit additional leverage to conduct business how they saw fit. But at the end of the day, we got access, which is ultimately what we wanted, to go in there and do recoveries.
And one of the places that just popped in my head that one of them, I think it was the 98 mission, I got them to take us to a cave. So we did, it was a tourist cave, and it took us in there. And just the level of propaganda, everything you see ties back to the deer leader and the great leader and everything. And it would be this stalagmite measures blah, blah, blah height, which corresponds with the birth date of the deer leader, Kim Il-sung, the great leader, Kim Il-sung. It was just the weirdness how everything you look at from just national or just natural features were all tied back into somehow Kim Il-sung or Kim Jong-un or somebody. So it was, and Chris would say, on this date, the deer leader stood at this location. So just very, very strange.
Everywhere in the hotels, every park that you go to, there is at least 17 references of the deer leader stood right here on this day. Picture of them, waving, and they no kidding worship the leadership over there, and that's how they've been brought up and indoctrinated.
So, talking about indoctrination and everything, as we were moving to maybe a little head up.
Go ahead. No.
Moving forward to one of our base camps we lived in, you may remember this one, Brad. We had to stop at a museum, and as you walk into the museum, we had to see the museum. We had to see what it was about, everything they had. And you walk in, and the first thing you see is the deer leader in a wax statue. And of course, they want you to sit there and bow to them, it's their tradition, And so you walk through, and they'll display all this stuff that all these countries have ever given them, just like some of the stuff we have here. And then, of course, you walk through the museum, you see everything that they want you to see, and you go upstairs, and they have a place that you sit, and you can just overlook the country, and see the mountains and everything. And that's where, it goes back into, they want us to buy alcohol, to have drinks with them, and do all this stuff. And, they want to pay us back in candy from our change. And, say you could see the indoctrination that the country has by when you walk into this museum, how they want you to, how they have their people to live. And so I know one of the places that we would go into when we were going to the Chosen, we stayed in a village. I think it was up in, was it Hamburg, somewhere up on the coast? Hamburg, yeah, Hamburg. And it was an industrial city. And so in the mornings, we were lucky we got to stay there a few days before we went on into the Chosen. But, they would come out in the mornings to work. And in this country at the time, that I can remember, that is, you don't have a assigned job to do in that country. It's whatever they assign you that morning to do. So you could, from little kids to elderly people, they would be out there lined up waiting to find out what their task was that morning.
They would. And speaking of assigned jobs, as an assistant team leader, one of the things you do is help the team kind of get organized and get set up and establish some base camps. I think at this point in North Korea, we were operating a base camp out of Unsan area, and you were involved in establishing one there at the Chosin Reservoir. You talk a little bit about what a base camp is like and the setup and what what it would look like?
So Unison was, much better because I came in after it was established, and we lived in, if anybody knows what Denver tents are, they're canvas tents, 2 people can live in them. We stayed in those. We had mess tents that we could go set up, which was a bigger tent to go in, and that's where we'd have our meetings. And then you would have, I remember Unison down at the lower part was our bathhouse and bathrooms. We could go down there, and it was in a little valley, and we had tents lined up on each side, and we had our security force from the North Korean Army that would guard us on the ridges. They'd watch over us and make sure we were safe and nobody bothered us and attacked or anything like that. So, but it was real funny. I don't know if you remember this, but right outside the bathroom area there was a gate. And right after the gate, there was a little river that we had to cross to come into the compound, our little compound. And just on the other side, the North Koreans had the same compound, almost exactly like ours. Whatever we had, they had. It didn't matter. And so, but if you got too far past the bathroom and the shower area, they'd blow a whistle at you. 1 whistle means that's a warning. Turn around and go back where you came from. 2 whistles, that might be bad for you. So we always, as Americans, we'd always test it just a little bit here and there, just to see, you have to, see what was going to happen, but we never tested enough where anybody got hurt. So, but, Franklin was talking about the Chosin in August, I think it was August of 2001, I think it was. I was over in Unsan doing it, and I got pulled off, and we had to go do an investigation into the Chosin. First time that we'd ever been in a Chosin reservoir. And don't get me wrong, it's a beautiful place up there. It's just untouched still at that time, Went up there, and it was just nothing there, nothing. I think we went through maybe a couple of villages at the time, the way we went up, and we talked about building hotels up there. They want us to build hotels so that we could stay in hotels, but it was really for them too, but we weren't in there, so their army. But went back in September, October, went right back in, and we built the base camp. This is the first time that we've built anything in the Chosin Reservoir since we left in the 50s. And it wasn't as elaborate as it was the one in Amazon, so we just started developing it. And same thing, we had the different tents, we had the large tents, and Brad, we were talking about this the other day, that we remember nights was getting down in the zeros, staying in these tents, trying to stay warm, and get up in the mornings and hope everything's thawed enough that we could go out to the recovery sites and start digging, and try to do that. But I want to tell you a little story back on the Unsan side. It was real funny. I alluded to that we had the North Korean soldiers that were guarding us, right? So you would think when somebody guards you, they face away from you to protect you from anybody injured, right? Well, they would face us to guard us. Always very weird. And you hear people that would be there before you in missions, and you hear these stories and stuff. So, and you really didn't think nothing about it. But you know what it is. So you'd be laying in your tent at night, and you hear rumbling and walking and stuff out there. They're walking around checking to make sure we're safe, right? And they would walk up behind our tents, and they all carry AK-47s. And you hear some tap, 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 that metal of that barrel against the metal poles of our tents, right? Tap, 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 tap. American, we're going to die tonight, So they would mess with us, They never done anything to us, but they would mess with our heads all the time, So it was interesting.
Were you nervous yet? How about now? So Brad, at this point, we're setting up a base camp, and as the archaeologist on the site, you're just collecting propaganda really up to this point, right? How did you deal with the delays, and was that normal for you? Were there any extenuating circumstances that would create additional delays in getting out to actually begin an excavation?
So on the 2001 mission around Chosin, so there was no base camp set up there. So the first couple show you like the level of seclusion and like there's no phones, right? There's no TV, there's no communication. If you turn on the TV, it's just the propaganda channels. So like in preparation for this, once I got invited to come, I started digging through some of my old photos, and I found this notebook, which I don't really have, I don't know why, but I did a notebook of just kind of daily recordings of what happened that day. So I opened up to September 11th, 2001. And again, there's a time difference, but just to kind of like highlight how secluded we were. Like most of these I have pages and pages per day. September 11th, 2001. Nothing going on at all. We tried to get another recon team to go to the base camp, but the KPA would not allow it. That's it, so show you like nothing. And then September 12th, we just received news this morning that there was a huge terrorist attack back home and several airplanes were hijacked and suicide crashed into government buildings. Again, we're just getting this through a sat phone call, and we're imagining that like the World Trade Towers probably were full of people. They probably fell down sideways. There could be, hundreds of thousands of people dead. I think Woody maybe somehow brought in a shortwave radio. So they're listening to some South Korea stations, and we're hearing like Bush just declared war on the axis of evil, and like we're like, holy crap, we are in the axis of evil. And then the South Koreans are saying North Korea may be involved in this. I remember our team leader at the time was like, we don't know what's going to happen. Like, you guys need to be prepared to be taken hostage. Like, sleep in your clothes with your money, because I think, we're going to be worth more to the North Koreans alive than anything else. But we may be bargaining chips. Like, what is, and then so then my final note on that day was, not to be selfish, but I can think of other places that I would rather be than in North Korea right now. So that was like the weirdest thing, and again, just how like nothing on TV, no communication. Like the first photograph I saw of 9/11 was not till we left country in October. So.
Brad was talking about that day, and it was funny. When you come into the country, they won't allow you to have electronics and things like that. And I had a CD player, and that's all we could take in, but fortunately it had a little shortwave radio, and I was listening to AFN in Korea, AFN in Korea, I was listening to radio, and that's where we heard that. And about that time it all happened, they started trials and pulled us into this one area, and that's where we ate at, and when they kept us located. That's when we started discussing what we were doing. Of course, we were being heard. They had everything bugged. And so, I was thinking, and at that time, my wife was pregnant with my daughter. And she was 7 months pregnant, I think, and she got a phone call that morning. And she said, hey, I just want to let you know Tom's okay, right? And so she's in Hawaii, right? And she said, okay, whatever. She didn't know anything about it yet. And I'm hearing these stories after the fact. And then, so somebody comes and knocks on her door. She comes downstairs and she said, hey, I just want to let you know Tom's okay. And she said, okay, somebody's told me this twice now. Why is Tom okay? What happened? And so, it's kind of interesting that she didn't even know for a period of time that's where she was at in Hawaii. And then she found out this, and then she understands, oh, Tom's in North Korea. Now that they're telling us that the team's okay. And so it was assuring that they were telling our families as well that we were taken care of while we were there. We were safe as well while we were there. So.
Brad had mentioned the seclusion we had when we did recoveries in North Korea. We left a liaison in Pyongyang, and we had specific times when we had a radio up at Chosin. So we did 2 recovery teams, one at Unsan and one in Chosin. And we had specific times that we had to try and contact Pyongyang over the radio to give, hey, we're digging here, we found remains, we didn't find remains, just very curt updates. Number one, for like, hey, everything's okay here, we're still good. and number two, to actually update the mission. But those specific times were because that is when the North Koreans would drop all of their electronic jamming so that we could actually contact Pyongyang over the radio. So, I mean, again, they are actively, trying to gather intelligence, prevent us from communicating, and so, all that in mind, we're still operating as best as we can under those situations and trying to accomplish the mission.
All right, so now after you've had some rather significant delays, taking some time, whether it's through a circuitous drive across the country to the site, Brad, you're finally now at the site, and you've done excavations all around the globe. How was it similar or different excavating these sites in North Korea compared to some of the other sites you've worked?
I think that the main difference, like the actual excavation and the archaeology, forensic anthropology, like once we're actually allowed to dig in the dirt, was not that different, but it was just the access, and we were at the complete mercy of the North Koreans, the North Korean army that was escorting us around, and some days they would be like, today we're going to take you to this site to dig, and then some days like we would be, we were working on, at one point around the Chosen, like we found a mass grave that had 12 individuals in it, and obviously like a huge deal, like probably the biggest site that had been discovered to date, and then they would just be like, today we are stopping work at 12. Why? We're like, we have a mass grave dig, we have like 2 days to finish this. These soldiers need to go back to do their laundry. And I was like, what? Like, we're going to stop working because like the KPA soldiers need to go do laundry at noon? Yes. But you can argue with them, but you're not gonna win that. Like again, it's not in the agreement, or you're at their total mercy. So that to me, and it was again reading through this booklet again, like I was getting pissed at a lot of this stuff because it was like, come on, just this like every day of just kind of this back and forth. So for me, that was very frustrating, and reading it again came out just because I just want to do the work, right? We've got these skeletons are being exposed, and we need to recover them and get them out. We don't need this like monkey business of playing these little games. So that to me was frustrating. You're going to see that in any country, but it's like it's magnified in North Korea.
Everything was a negotiation with them. I mean, even though everything was set and stone and contract and everything that we had to follow, but if anything you had to do, you had to sit down with an official negotiation with them. You had our side of the table, you had their side of the table, and everything was just long and drawn out, and
I can remember my linguist was a Marine captain, and he would often comment. So we talked about the isolationist. He would often comment that and Mr. Chun talked about the accents, right? Well, the verbiage that the North Koreans would use was antiquated. So it had not evolved like you go to South Korea. Like think about the kids and the terminology that we use, right? And the terminology we use as a kid, it's different from with our children, and that language changes over time. One of the things that was kind of interesting about the North Korean language is it hadn't changed. They use like antiquated terms for like things like belt or pants or shirt. And it just goes to show you that they are, self-contained, not interested in growing, not interested in change. And so that's one aspect that I thought was interesting.
So for these recoveries, what was the preservation like?
Like this mass grave that we did that again had 12 individuals. The preservation was the skeletal remains were in really good condition, and we still found some dog tags, found some like those pineapple grenades are still there, but so the preservation was pretty good for the most part as far as the recoveries that we did.
Anything else?
I would we were able to recover a couple sets of remains, and to Brad's point, uniforms still on, dog tags, boots. He had his wallet still opened up, and could see the contents in there. So everything was very well preserved. I think there were other instances where they had been tampered with.
Yeah, so it sounds like at this point you're really describing what we would call in archaeology as primary in situ burials, right? This is the site where a person was buried. Was that always the case from these sites that you would work here?
No, absolutely not. The mass grave that we did, that was a primary in situ burials. But the other thing I think, at least in the earlier missions when I was there, the North Koreans, they don't like surprises. So we definitely found sites that showed tampering, where it was like the North Koreans kind of staged a burial and took us there and came up with a story saying a farmer told us that they were farming here and found some bones. We think you should dig right here. And oh my gosh, there's bones there. So they had kind of staged it. And even on one site, there was we had remains that had glue on them, so they definitely had been brought in from another location. I think that was a way for them to kind of return remains to us, but come up with kind of a story to make it seem somewhat legitimate. And I do think when they took us to the mass grave around Chosen, I think they'd been out there before, kind of poking around, and knew there was something there, so then they took us there. But once we started digging it and exposing it, it ended up being about probably 20 feet by 3 feet, like a trench with these bodies in it. I don't think they realized it was quite as extensive, but I think they knew we were going to find something there, but it was more. I think it was a lot bigger than they might have thought.
So Woody, every site I've ever been on to, there's always an effort and planning for some sort of medical evac, right? How do you manage the health and safety of the team while deployed? You're already out here, you're isolated. What kind of medevac plan did you guys have on your teams?
Well, Franklin, it was funny you mentioned that. So there's really, I think back to other missions I've done in Papua New Guinea and Vietnam and Tibet and other places I went to, and we always had the ability to have medical support. We always had places that we could go if something happened. We always, it was there. So I remember in the Chosen, because it was the first time we ever been there, there was really no anything medical except for, I think we had a special forces guy with us, a medic, and then we had an Air Force doctor or something, I can't remember. And so that was our extent to the medical support, but Franklin was trying to bring up the fact that I got injured during that mission, and trying to figure out how to attend to my injuries, and I messed my ankle or foot up, I can't remember what it was. So the North Koreans come up with the idea that, hey, let's go back to Pyongyang, and let's go to the hospital and get x-rays done. So here we go, we trek back down to Pyongyang, which is, day and a half, 2 days ride, I can't remember. We get to this hospital, and the hospital is a gray colored building that you don't see hardly any windows, and it's just weird looking. And we go in, and they take me downstairs to the x-ray room, and it's like a dungeon, it really was, and it reminded me of something in the 40s and 50s of maybe Castle Grayskull, if anybody knows what, that. And so you walk in, and they have equipment in there that was nothing that you would ever imagine. When they turned it on, the power was so much that all the lights and electricity went out everywhere else because it drew so much power from it. It was unreal. But yeah, that was some of the medical treatments that we had just in case something happened.
Must be still why you have a little hitch in your giddy up, huh?
Yeah, they couldn't fix it right.
All right, guys, in the last couple minutes here before we wrap things up, I just want to say that as we've all strived to positively affect the lives of the families that we serve in this mission, I'm certain that your lives have also been affected by doing this work and certainly by having the opportunity to do this work in North Korea. And I just ask, open floor, is there anything else from your experience there that we didn't cover today or haven't covered over the last couple of conversations that you would like to leave us with?
You know, as part of the Army team that does the, that helps DPAA do the briefings, I sit there and listen to a lot of the analysts that provide you all the data. And we talk about, Unton and Chosen, and we talk about the terrain, and they talk about the camps, they talk about everything. And I do remember that they talk about how we were backing out of North Korea, we were moving people out and the roads and everything. And I can sit back and remember that, just thinking that the cold weather that we were dealing with, it had to be what they were dealing with, even worse, right? We see all the pictures of the snow when they're retreating back out of the Chosen. But the terrain has not changed. The terrain is exactly the way they're briefing you all the way it is from what Brad and I and Chris saw. Nothing has changed. So yeah, it's still there.
You could look at the pictures in a lot of the books that I brought with the terrain features, and hey, this is where this battle happened, and here's a picture of it, and you can still see the same terrain features. It's that untouched, particularly up in the Chosen. I think that what has stuck with me is this mission. Not just in North Korea, but overall, the mission of DPAA has a very special place in my heart. It's one of the most rewarding jobs that I've ever had. I'm no longer actively associated with it, but I love the job so much that I did marry an anthropologist. So I do keep tabs on it, and it always has a special place in my heart. And, one of the things that I know you've heard is the passion of the people who have briefed you today. Don Barry, who extremely passionate. That passion continues every day looking for your loved ones. And so just know that there's a dedicated group of professionals looking to bring you all closure.
Well, I can't say anything better than what Chris just said, but other than the 7 years I spent with SILHI and the JPAC were amazing, and just the mission was incredible, and I still stay in contact with folks from the lab and completely appreciate the importance of this work, and I'm glad I had the opportunity to go to North Korea multiple times, and were I still there and the opportunity would arise again, I'd be the first to raise my hand and want to go back, because it's super weird, but it's important work, and that's the only way we're going to get these people back, is to get back there and do more missions.
Well, gentlemen, thank you for your time. Thank you for your willingness to share your experiences. It's been fun. Thank you.
Franklin, thanks very much for a superb facilitation. If there were one word that would encapsulate what you just heard, to me that word would be surreal. The dynamic you see here is still applied today. This is hard work. It's complex work. It's, with a host nation. It's in a foreign country, foreign language, austere conditions. So it takes a leadership team led by the team leader, team sergeant, as well as the recovery leader. They're the epitome of what still happens today. These three gentlemen continue to give back after they left. We're very proud of them being alumni. Brad Adams, noted anthropologist, would come back and conduct competency tests for today's anthropologists to ensure they were at the top of their game. Chris Tarrant, as you heard, came back, first Air Force team leader, came back as a major. As you heard, marries a young anthropologist, Maria Teresa. That's what we call a JPAC power couple. And then Tom here, 92 Mike, mortuary affairs specialist, much like the sergeant major, comes back to serve in Army casualty, where he's been for many years. What they talked to you about was the result of 5 years of turnovers, repatriations by North Korea in the early 90s. In the early 90s. Working with North Korea on those repatriations, we were able to help them understand why what these gentlemen described to you needed to be the next step. That in turn led to the very first excavation, JRO, recovery operation, in 1996. That happened for 10 years. We progressively learned from those 10 years. It got better. The lessons learned that they applied were given to their successors. So that by 2005, it is a very effective, very efficient operation. All because of the foundational work that they did. That ended in 2005. Fast forward, the next time North Korea wants to talk about JROs, 2011. Took us a year and a half, 2 years, till we finally nailed down the negotiations to go back in 2012, and then that gets derailed. Fast forward, the very next time they're open to talking about JROs is, as you know, 2018. 2 face-to-face meetings. Times have changed. While the landscape, the situations that they encounter may still be the same, we think it's different in terms of what we're able to do and achieve with the North Koreans. Again, those 2011 negotiations were fruitful. It led to an agreement being signed. The 2 face-to-face meetings we had with them in 2018 were fruitful. Unfortunately, as you heard earlier, a word that was used is episodic. There's nothing more episodic. I'll leave you one more vignette. I think you can gather how surreal it was for them. We were mindful back then, it's not anything against gender, but in the 10 years of JROs, we only sent men forward, civilian, military. We were purposeful, we were mindful about that. Fast forward, 2018, they say 55 boxes, come get them in Wonsan International Airport. Again, being mindful, times have changed. 4 scientists we send, 3 women. We told the Air Force, the C-17 crew that took the team in, what we were doing. Air Force was also mindful. The entire C-17 crew, all women. So times have changed. But if not for the tremendous leadership that each of these gentlemen showed back in the early days that we were able to build upon, and by the way, we have a concept plan just as we presented in 2012, just as we presented in 2018, ready to go, 2 teams, 4 times a year. We have that con plan ready to go, ready to implement, just as these gentlemen did. Gentlemen, thanks very much. Welcome back. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Great, thanks a lot.